coming in. I guess that was our good friend Angie. As you guys know, she is the leader, the founder, the mastermind of Dominican writers. I think that it's very influential. It teaches us about our history, but also highlights many books from our authors from our from the island. So sometimes they don't get a lot of recognition, but this organization does major work in terms of making sure the history is out there. Does anybody have any questions? No? Are you guys going to be very shy? Because this is going to be interactive. I want to be able to talk to you. Okay, all right. So, we're going to discuss this book topic, especially this time around. This is the fourth book in the Dominican writers book study under me. We're going to be talking about an island-wide struggle for freedom. It talks about the revolution, the emancipation, as well as the enslavement in the whole island of Hispaniola, which we're going to talk about Saint-Domingue, which is the west, and Santo Domingo, which is the east. We're going to talk about that split that happened, because it talks a bit about the split in the book from 1789 to 1809. All right. Does anybody have any questions? No? I'm just here talking to myself. Okay. Fantastic. Once again, my name is Professor Remy Salas. This is a product of the Dominican mother. So they just be inventing stuff, okay? So we're just gonna go straight into it. I didn't break it down to chapters because I know this is a very, very long book, right? And it had a lot of information. Can anybody tell me if they read the whole entire book, or at least got halfway there? No, not even Isadora, not even Suheni. Oro. Okay.
Parece que nadie leyó.
Nadie leyó. People are definitely not. Okay. Don't be shy now. You guys can talk, correct?
It is at the top of my list. I'm sorry to interject, and I'm really looking forward to reading it because there's a lot to be said about this very topic. So I'm looking forward to getting started, to hear, of course, from you tonight.
Absolutely, thank you. But this is also, I want to highlight that this is probably the cloudiest time period of the history. People talk about, 1822 to 1844, when Haiti came in, but also people talk about the Restoration period and the Restoration War in 1861. But also people talk about the Haitian Revolution and the rebellion. But this book talks about what was going on in the Dominican Republic during this time, especially in the Haitian Rebellion, where we were just hanging out, we were just riding horses. It highlights a lot of that, and I think that's the greatness of this book. So I always like to start my chats with Dominican word of the day. I want to make sure everybody gets embraced with the culture. So just in case you're out of town, somebody say something, and be like, I know what that means. So today, the word is krulai. I will let if anybody knows what that means. You can raise your hand, or I can just tell you. What does krulai mean? Nobody's ever heard that word?
I've heard it. I've heard it kind of like as a recent, but I guess it would say, I would interpret it to mean like we're lit, like it is what it is, like it's going down.
It's you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Anybody else wants to take a stab at it? No? Got a lot of shy folks out here today. I'm over here. She likes the sound of it. So yeah, like we're real light, we're good, we're relaxed, we're chilling. It's a word that you hear a lot. I'm not sure in the north or in the south. When I say the south, I say the capital. You hear this word a lot. And this is our Dominican word of the day for today's conversation. Does anybody have any questions? She's gonna start saying it. I'm influencing bad culture. I'm so sorry. All right, so just to get straight to it. So this is the book, once again. And the overview of the whole entire book is that this book studies the history of the Dominican Republic, all right, during the time of the Haitian Revolution, all right? And it's how, the revolution impacted the colony of Santo Domingo. And the island-wide struggle for freedom shares the Dominican involvement in the Haitian Revolution. People always don't understand that there was a lot of things happening, a lot of rebellions, a lot of fights, as well as many Maroons, which are free Black that were formerly slaves, goes to Maroon Town and they help in the Haitian Revolution, even if you were both sides. When I teach my classes, I always like to let people know that take away the political entities that they put on the island or anywhere in the world. You know, these are just people. And if you see people that look like you, which if you're Black and you see another Black guy, you know, or going through the same struggle, you're gonna naturally flow with that person. So in this time, the involvement in the Haitian Revolution from Dominicans and even the indisputable mutual constitution of Saint-Domingue and Santo Domingo in the 1700s, right? Which remains kind of understudied, but this is one of the few books that I found. So the author is Graham Nessler, and he highlights the revolutionary process to the mutual constitution of the island's colonial and national histories, and to the recognition of the regional struggle of the emancipation of slavery, as well as the Atlantic slave trade. All right, when we talk about Haiti being free, Haiti could have just minded their business and just stood there, but they wanted to help everybody out. I'm going to talk about how they went to the eastern part, how this translated to Puerto Rico, how this translated to Cuba. But people, well, I'm gonna leave it to like the different slides of a lot of Latin American countries got a lot of help from that. All right, the author also argues how reenslavement during the French rule in Santo Domingo crystallized as a whole a set of racist laws, punitive regulating everything from mobility to the inheritance, because we gotta think about many of the criollos. When I say criollos, is Spaniards that were in the Dominican Republic for hundreds of years, at least 200 years, that came for riches and things of that nature. When the Haitian Revolution came about, many of them had to flee, and many of them had to fight for the inheritance, which they wanted back. As he also establishes the reaction against the Black freedom, also endangering the kidnapping, the piracy, the violence, of course, both in Santo Domingo and beyond the Dominican shores, all right? So in this book, he points out the class, the color, life in the colonies, which is both sides, how the island was divided and succeeded, and how the elites control both sides, all right? Does anybody know how the island was divided before we, for the few folks that read the book? How do you guys feel about that? No, nobody knows. Well, you're in luck because we're going to talk about it since it was in the book. All right. So, and we're also going to talk about the Dominican rebellions in Nigua and Asua. All right. Do we have any folks here from Nigua? Roots from Nigua? Other than myself? No? Boca de Nigua? No? Okay. A lot of shy folks right here. Okay. Nigua had a lot of, the slaves there in the Dominican Republic from Nigua, they were vicious, they were always fighting. They was never successful as, to take over, but they were able to always make they were always able to rebel, and the book highlights that. The French occupation in Santo Domingo, and the most important part is ending of slavery for the whole entire island, okay? Does anybody have any questions? No. Basically, that's the book, but in a short version. Okay.
Can you talk, I guess, a little bit more how you were saying how the island was divided? Was it more of like in a regional sense, or do you mean in terms of like the geographical space?
East and west. Remember, it's one island, so it's a, you know, and right now we have two nations. So there's a division between the west and the east. Remember, it used to be all Spanish, and then a few treaties came on, which we're going to discuss now, and how that treaty, one of the treaties, ended up giving people. Usually, this book, I love how it highlights that people do not. Sometimes they forget how how the French technically took over the whole thing, but a lot of things didn't allow them to really take over. So that means in Santo Domingo, we talking about bachata music, we would have been speaking French. You know, if there would have been no que lo que, it would have been bonjour. So it was just a whole different thing. How you doing, Santana? Doing. It's always consistent.
I'm good. How are you, Congressman?
No, not me. I'm just a little guy in the Bronx. So I'm gonna go into the next slide. So Mike, I like to make this interactive. So I want to ask you guys, even if you didn't read the book, I feel like many people wasn't able to finish the book. The book was heavy, but maybe you can give me your perspective. Like during the Haitian Rebellion, which turned into the revolution, what do you think was occurring in Santo Domingo on the eastern side? And maybe you can take a perspective from the French or Spanish colonizer, for slave owners, or perspective of slaves. Anybody can try. Don't be shy now. What do you think was happening in the Dominican Republic during the Haitian Revolution? You think they were just hanging out and they're like, wow, hay un lío en otro lado, me vayan para allá. Suheni.
If I may, you know, given how obscure this period of time is, you know, in the Dominican and Haitian history, how do you feel grounded? How were you able to really prove the veracity and the authenticity of the information that you came across to document it in your book? In other words, how were you able to find reliable sources of information that can really shed some light in this very crucial time period between the two islands?
I was able, so it's a question for me. So this book, I know this professor. He's a very known professor, very good. He was also able to, remember I said about this time period is a very gray area that's not been studied too much, but he was able to reference many of the top scholars. Sylvant, which is probably the most in Dominican studies, I see him as one of the top professors and scholars that go, and he has both sides. He's Dominican and Haitian, but he is more Dominican, and he's able to really translate a lot of his work. He's very consistent in terms of in Syracuse University. So his work, I see it as a reliable source, and it's being studied right now. This book hasn't been out for that long, but everything aligns with the members, the people that were involved, as well as the treaties involved, and one thing about certain scholars that they like to stay on their own path, but he was able to bring information from everyone. So it's I really think this is I recommend this as a reliable source for the time period as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. No, you don't want to say. Well, I'm going to ask Stephanie to answer the question, and then probably Jadira, because I didn't want to just read all these notes.
Okay, so I guess, and I would presume that if the island is not that big, so I would consider them like actually having a harsher treatment towards the enslaved people in the east side to kind of like have them simmer down and almost, I would say, have them in a way maybe at bay for them not to get any ideas to think that that type of behavior would work on this side. And that's just kind of like my assumptions, because sometimes like that happens where, you know, keep away the bad influences that would cause you to think or even possibly consider an uprising. So I would say more of an iron fist to keep things and the structures and the norms as they were.
Very good perspective. I'm gonna say something after that. Jadira, do you want to say anything or anybody
Yeah,
else?
yes, I can. It's what I typed. I think they were, based on their background, they were different perspectives. I feel like the leaders of Santo Domingo, I think the guy's name was Garcia. He's the one that I'm referring to, because estaba haciendo el chivo loco. Like, it was not with him or with that side of the island, that because they were colonized by Spain, it was different ruling, different country, like a whole different ball game. And being so close, he had another thing coming.
Well, we also got to think about the geopolitics that was happening at this time. So that's why Garcia, he was the leader representing the Spanish. But when we talk about the treaty later on, it becomes a French colony on paper. So now he's like, you know, so I'm not skipping Nosarios and the treaty of Resnick. I'm not skipping that because the Treaty of Resnick happened a long, long time ago, but we're going to talk about the Treaty of Basel because this is only going to be a short time period, 1789 to 1809. Suheni? I don't know if you had your hand up. I'm sorry. So during
I'm
this
sorry,
time,
my phone just, I forgot to put my hand down. I'm sorry about that.
it's okay. So during this time, it was everyone had a perspective, right? And you know, and we're going to talk about the Treaty of Basel that happened. The Treaty of Basel basically gave the eastern side to the French. So during this time, you see there was a lot of exchanges with what's happening on the island, but also there was a lot of wars between France and Spain back in Europe, all right? But if you were a white slave owner, and there was also mixed slave owners, people forget that, especially in Haiti. In Haiti, there was a lot of mixed, rich, very wealthy Black people in that side. And they were, of course, slavery was a lot harsher. It was documented in the Western side. So that's why many of the slaves were able to revolt, because they were fed up. But from the perspective in Santo Domingo, they were always fighting back, especially how they highlighted in the first chapter they were talking about in Boca de Nigua. Even though they were never successful, they were always fighting back. And in Aswa, they fought back many, many times, and they kept coming back. This also helped out when the reason why France was never able to take over fully is because the Haitian Revolution was happening. So when the Haitians started coming into the eastern side, what do you think happened to the Black Dominicans that were fighting back? They're not gonna be like, no, mi hermano, I'm not no Dominicano, no, I'm not one of you guys. No, they came together and they fought against colonizers, and they were going back and forth. Maroon slaves, there was a lot of maroon colonies that they mentioned in the book that I thought it was interesting. And they dissected many of those maroon slaves were from Senegal, which there's a large population of Dominicans that have Senegalese background, basically saying that after they got so many Senegalese slaves, they're like, we don't like those slaves because they were the most rebellious at that time in the island. So those maroon Blacks, they also fought back. So it kind of made it hard for the French and the emperor at that time, Napoleon, to really take over. All right, and that's why I think it plays a major part in terms of what was happening at this time in the island, because also in the book later on, later in the book, it talks about how the British also see this as an easy grab, and it doesn't happen. So we're gonna get into that. I know we don't have too much time, but I want to be able to cover as much as possible of the book. All right. Does anybody have any questions so far? If you guys want to ask, let me see. Slaves in Haiti were different from the slaves. Yep, that is true. There was a lot of different tribes. They wanted to make sure they got different type of African tribes because they didn't want them communicating and seeing themselves as the same. So it made it harder for them to rebel. So yes, Otto. So the revolution and the ending of slavery for both sides. All right, I'm jumping into like chapter 2 and 3, where in the history of the Dominican Republic during the French era. So this is the reason why this era is so short, is because it's called the French era, la era francesa. All right, when France acquired Santo Domingo because they were annexed it into Saint-Domingue, and briefly came to acquire the whole entire island of Hispaniola. All right, because of the Treaty of Basel. The Treaty of Basel is critical, all right, to understand what happens in this century, all right? Because this also, even though we're not going to get into 1822, Treaty of Basel kind of shows a little bit of that time period, what was in the minds of like Toussaint and Sanchez in Santo Domingo, because they wanted to make sure that the main thing is to end slavery, but also they didn't want slavery on the other side because they didn't want to spill over, okay? So allowing Spain to see the Eastern colony as a consequence of the French Revolutionary Wars. All right, so the Treaty of Basel of 1795, which granted its half to the island of France by 1795, and the use and Toussaint were in control of Saint-Domingue. All right, so the Haitian Revolution was in full effect. So Toussaint kind of really had a lot of stake in this time period. All right. Even though he wasn't there to see the whole thing happen, because by 1803 he was assassinated, killed, facing all the challenges, rebuilding the society for all those years of warfare. All right, so I always like to open up the floor for a deeper conversation. How does this treaty changes things in the island? So if you was a criollo in Santo Domingo, and you were always involved with the Spanish crown and the king, now you get a text message, you get an email like, hey guys, this is no longer this is not part of Spain anymore. This is part of French, because they had to give it up because of that. So once you see that note, how do you think that changes things for Dominicans on the island? Free and enslaved. What do you think happened? What do you get from the book? Crickets.
I'm gonna say some resistance and maybe some fear of the unknown, because we see here again that the Dominicans wanted to stay allied to Spain instead of France. And when I say the Dominicans, meaning the ruling class, for obvious economic reasons. They wanted to keep their slaves. They wanted to keep the social status that they had. And the French owning that part of the island was going to put all that in jeopardy.
Absolutely. Very well said. Anybody else wants to take a stab at it?
Yes. I was going to say, which is interesting because we're having this topic of conversation dealing with the US-Mexico border in class today. And one of the things that we were discussing is the difference in languages. Like, it's like you wake up one day and it's like they tell you, to use that as an example, well, Spanish is no longer your language of choice. This is the language that is used. So something as that could like really destabilize you, because you wake up one day, let's say, once everything's signed and done with and they're implementing the new rule. And if you go from Spanish to French, like, how do you navigate that? What if you don't speak French? What if you're not knowledgeable of the new laws of the land? Like, how do you advocate for yourself?
Absolutely. And just to put some, when I was reading this book, I was even taking it back because I like what Odo mentioned on the chat. Just thinking about the criollos that was there, right? So many of the criollos left Spain, probably 200 years, yeah, about 300 years back to build a new life, to get titles and build wealth. So with all these changes later on, with all these changes happening later on, it played a big, it definitely was a scary time for them, because everything that they built, the deeds of their lands that they thought they was going to pass down to the kids, it was in jeopardy, because France was not going to abide for that. France was going to say, hey, well, it's a new colonizer. And during this time, you have to think about France, right? France had Louisiana. Louisiana for a long time was not part of the whole American colony in that aspect. It was a French colony. It was a Spanish to a French colony. So France at this time was trying to take over. It was like the new kid on the block with Napoleon. So they were really trying to really take over from Europe to this side of the world. All right. So they knew that they came there to implement their people and to abstract as much as possible. Also thinking about the criollos of this time. When I say criollos, I think about the Dominicans born there, right? Because criollo, that means it could be Creole, so it's a different definition wherever you are. But the Dominicans that, and I call them Dominicans, even though the Dominican people was not really established just yet. All right, before anybody says it, Juan Pablo Duarte wasn't even born yet. Okay, at this time, he was born in 1813. I don't know why it stays in my head. All right, so and during this time, those people already had a kind of culture amongst them. They already knew how they've been together for 200 years. They had 100 years of misery. So now everything changes, and the people that you're around changes. The deeds, everything you thought you was going to send to your kids changes. Slavery was a big thing for them, of course. That changes because the Haitians they were out for blood in terms of, no, that's not going to happen here. Okay, and France was still back and forth with it, but most likely they were pro-slavery. So a lot of things change at that time, especially the way of life changes. Anybody else has anything to say about the treaty changing? Take it for example, out of nowhere, we're in the United States. I think everybody here is in the United States, and out of nowhere, Canada. I don't know, it's Canada. France. This is France. Out of nowhere, this whole country becomes French. Now they changing everything. You have home ownership, you have deeds, this and that. They're going to change all of that. It really plays to it puts your whole life in jeopardy. So many folks in the criollos that had a lot of established businesses, fincas, and things of that nature, they fled to Puerto Rico, they fled to Cuba, they fled to other Spanish colonies. Okay, so yeah, definitely was way more harsh. That's another thing. They were not everywhere in the island. Slavery was, of course, every owner was different. Of course, slavery in Haiti was a whole different type of thing. In Jamaica was a whole different type of animal. This wasn't in the book, but this is in the book of the Dominican people. And it always makes me laugh because history, we were connected historically, right? That there was a letter written by a French colonist to shame the Spanish, how they, for those 100 years of how they were mixing and considering the mixed kids' family. And some of them it was just a lot relaxed where they will even drink with them outside, not inside, outside. So I always think about El Coro, everybody on their horse outside. And it just goes in there. Even though he wrote that letter to shame them, it just shows you how the differences. You will never see that in Saint-Domingue. That was unheard of. All right, even just think about in the United States with slavery, that was not going to happen. So yeah, you make a good point there. So why was it so difficult for France to implement this treaty? I mean, this book was, I think, almost 3 chapters in. Why was it so hard for them to, on paper, Santo Domingo is French now? Why was that so difficult to implement that? Anybody wants to try?
They didn't have the manpower to go enforce it.
That's true. But why do they need the manpower? They'd be like, hey, The paper's ours. This is ours now. What was going on? There was a lot. I'm gonna say it in Spanish. I don't know if everybody speaks Spanish. Había un reguero in this country. Does anybody? What was a reguero? What was going on there? I feel like I'm the only one that read the book. I was sweating to get through this book. It was tough too. I thought I was gonna lose hair. The Haitian Revolution. Right? You can have it on paper, and even on paper, the western side is still technically Haiti. I mean French, but this, there was a revolt. They kept fighting, and then they went to the eastern side. So even though it's on paper, the fights made it very difficult to really take over the whole eastern side as well. All right. Also, Toussaint at this time, he knew if they were able to set up shop there, they'll eventually go to the western side. So they were fighting there, and they didn't have the manpower. And that's the same thing that happened with the British. The British later on, they tried to take a stake in this, but they didn't have the manpower. In an urban sense, because I know I have some scholars here, in an urban sense, and I'm going to keep it kind of straight. Haiti had them hands, all right? Haiti was about that life, all right? At this time, you did not want any problems with the Haitians. So if you were fighting on that side, remember Haiti helped out Simon Bolivar in terms of getting independence there. It was just about, they didn't believe in slavery. They understood how harsh it was, and they wanted to make sure they could have this side for slave free. Nobody has nothing to say. I don't want to be aquí como el baboso. Okay. Right. So I think I have one more question there. So what were some of the geo and national political challenges? I think I saw that from chapter 2 to chapter 3 and 4. What were some of the challenges that were happening outside of the island that affected the island? If you guys were in my class, I would have gave you a quiz. I would have failed.
No quemamos. But I mean, wasn't the argument also taken back to France? And France was outlawing slavery for all of their colonies. It was not only our island. So that this discussion was beyond just the Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Yep. So that's why that's when the British started coming in. The British, they're like, nah, we got to get this money, remember slavery was starting to be outlawed everywhere, and it was being outlawed everywhere, and the reason why France started taking that, and I think I mentioned it in the last book club, with all the challenges in not the last one, the Black Jacobins, which was like a classic. It is a classic. All the tears for Black people and the rights. They fought hard for that. But what other geopolitics or national political challenges they face? I mean,
I have a question.
Sí, señora.
I have a question on the British because son unos oportunistas. How could they, hypocritically so, come and try to invade when they have their struggles with, like, the United States with the same issue of slavery?
Yeah, at this time, they lost to the United States, 1776. They need to get this money. And they had other colonies. Of course, they got Jamaica. Remember, Jamaica used to be a Spanish colony. So people, and you start seeing Trinidad was a Spanish colony. But a lot of some of the old criollos that were for slavery, they're like, man, they're tripping over there. I got investments. they don't want to work. They want to be free, So that played a big part in terms of bringing them back, but they didn't have the manpower, especially when you think about the Black Dominicans. You think the Black Dominicans were like, nah, man, I'm Dominican. They have to relajo. Está loco. No, they were trying to be free too. So the manpower on the island was tremendous in terms of, with the West and the people that were enslaved and the people of mixed descent. So it was very, very interesting time, but it was a cloudy time. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Yep, in 1804. Yep. And why were they free on 1804? What happened in 1804? The revolution.
The
Revolution and the independence, and then they wanted to make sure that all spilled over during this time. So very good. Odo over here spitting some information. Anybody have any questions in terms of this chapter? I feel like I gotta put a little musiquita or algo to wake y'all up. What happened? You guys see that? Wait. One second. I think I just lost the thing.
We can still see your screen.
Wait, not on mine. I can't see it. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. So going into the next part of the book was the revolution and how that transformed the old and the new world. We will kind of get into that. Remember, this is like a short time period. So one of the reasons why I thought this book was a bit heavy is because this author, he was good at almost dictating every breathing of the people there, even like every step they took, everybody involved. And I thought that is tremendous, great work, and all his research, but it was a bit heavy in terms of just like the time period. But during this time, the French sold off their possessions, especially in the United States with the Louisiana Purchase. And Haiti itself became a redoubt of anti-colonial revolution, all right? On the conditions that they wanted to free everyone, everybody Black at this time from the continent. So when we talk about in the South, South America, when he gave his support to Simon Bolivar, all right, in his struggle to end slavery in South America. It was major because when you think about Simon Bolivar, who knows who Simon Bolivar?
The liberator.
Liberator, of course. And then from there you have Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela,
Panama.
And Panama. Yes, thank you. Where he helped end slavery and get rid of the Spanish. This also transformed in terms of how slavery, reshaped everybody around the world. What do you think? What was people's thoughts of the Haitian Revolution and how that changed, like the neighboring countries of, even from the perspective of the colonizers, like, oh, they fight back.
I mean, I know that it inspired, the slaves that were here in the United States to revolt. And so I know that for, American plantation owners, it was very much like a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And it like put fear in them that like the slaves that they were holding would get ideas. Yep. And then for the slaves themselves, it was like, okay, there's hope. Like maybe something that they thought wasn't possible, because of how bad their conditions were for so long became possible to them.
I mean, you hit the nail just spot on, especially in Jamaica. Jamaica, 2 years later, after the revolution, they will have a big time revolt with the Maroons that just shaped the country. So, and you have to think about Dutty Buckman, which he came from Haiti and went to Jamaica. So this kind of like reshaped, it was like the biggest shocker of the world. Remember at this time, Napoleon in Europe, he had everybody shook. All right, think about someone that's knocking everybody out, and then he loses his battle against slaves. It was absurd at this time. So they didn't just defeat anybody. They defeated a giant of this time. They defeated the biggest guy that was able to defeat in all those Spanish wars that resulted to the Treaty of Basel. It was against Napoleon and his brother, and that empire, right? So Spain lost to France, but the slaves in Saint-Domingue was able to be successful, and that came from. And just talk about that army. That army was very influential. They was just not just fighting anybody. They were very, very smart and strategic. Toussaint knew that if something happened to him, he had backups, general, backup general, backup general, backup general. So if you kill one, you're still gonna have somebody come in. All right. So he was very strategic. Remember, Toussaint was a general. He was very, very. He had a lot of history in his belt, a lot of experience in his belt when it came to that. So ending slavery in the Dominican Republic later, not now, but later, inspired many Spanish colonies like Puerto Rico and Cuba to fight together to end colonization. All right. When we talk about, and this is just in the book, it doesn't talk about that, but I always like to translate and connect all of us because we're all connected in many ways. I don't know if you guys feel that way.
I want to share something that I also got from the Army recruitment in particular. I felt like that was the beginning of the identity crisis for Dominicans because depending on what army was recruiting who, came the promises of what type of freedom they would get. And to me, that's where you see the alliances of like, am I Spanish? Am I Dominican? Am I, it was all for political gains. And this has been passed down generation to generation, and it manifests in what we see today, where our people are not, some of our people are not owning the full totality of their heritage. And I think that's what it reminded me of when I was reading how the armies were recruiting.
Yeah, even when this, I love that. That was actually, it was a little chapter there that they even spoke when the British came around, because the British wanted to put in, they were pro-slavery, but the British told, since they saw the number of soldiers and fighters when they had the number of soldiers there, they asked some of the Black Dominicans. They asked some of the Black Dominicans, "Do you want to fight with us? You're going to get freed, right?" But if they fought and they would have won with the British, everybody else would have been enslaved. So it's like, and I get that. I thought that was interesting that you say that. And that's always going to be part of the history in the art, even when the Trinity, damn, I'm over here jumping outside of the book. I feel like this time period leads to 1822. And when you think about 1822 and 1840, like that time period, you start seeing Dominicans align. The reason why Juan Pablo Duarte was so magnificent in terms of his way of thinking is because he was the only one said, we're Dominican, we're Trinitarios. You have Buenaventura Baez said, Buenaventura Baez was pro-French. Remember, he became president. He was pro-French. Santana was a president later on that was pro-Spanish, and he didn't feel that they can sustain by themselves, right? So there's always this, I'm with this, I'm with that, I'm here. And to see someone to say, now we're our own, we're going to build from here and let's move forward. So you see a lot of separations amongst the people in the identity aspect of it. So Very good, very good. Anybody else wants to say anything? It's a book club. I want to feel like I'm lecturing. Um, I want to say I read that terrible statement, of course. I was like, where's he going with this? Even though I am a Santana. All right, so I'm gonna move forward since nobody else has anything. This is actually an image of that I got from that's part of the Dominican the Dominican Republic of the free maroon slaves that were part in the I found it at a museum. So going into the later chapters, Santo Domingo and the rise of Tucson. Right? We can never dismiss Tucson's influence. All right, I'm pro-Dominican. I love my Dominican people. Anything that has to do with my people, the food, the dancing, everything. But I don't dismiss in terms of what Haiti played part. I know this is controversial for many folks. Where we have to say Haiti did play a big part of the future of the Dominican Republic, especially at this time. Because if Haiti didn't help out, we would have been speaking French or English. All right. If your name is Jose, your name would have been John. You would have been eating fish and chips, Namango. All right. That's how history, you just don't know what happened, what could have happened at this time. All right. So Santo Domingo was clearly a critical theater of fighting at this time. So people were in the eastern side, it was a battleground. All right. Many battles in San Juan Valley, for example, the pre-occupied forces that steadily from 1796 to 98, even before Louverture's decision to occupy the East. All right. In his consideration of Louverture of Tucson, his aims in Santo Domingo after the 1800s that was expanded by the author, not only one territory of strategic importance, but to also on a familiar and necessary reminder of the limits of just freeing up everybody, all the slaves, people of African descent. All right, that was his primary goal. All right, and slave abolition was never functional from the scheme of labor control. All right, so that was something that was still being discussed at that time, because the elites wanted to understand like who's going to work the lands. There wasn't about that. So they were also still trying to figure out the schemes for labor control. Later on, the reason why that's so important, Tucson didn't live that long to see the 1822 to 1844, but that was a big part of the friction between the Dominicans and the Haitians later on when they come as one. Right? The scheme of labor control, how are we going to pay off this loan? So this was a big part of this time. And you start seeing it, reading it in the book. So this time, even though it was just a short time period, the Dominican Republic was in a very big political limbo because now the British start coming in and they appointed their own governor to come in. All right. On paper, it's still the French, the Spanish still has some involvement. You have the Criollos there, and then you have the British there, which is they put in John Simcoe, right? And this is where I kind of discussed earlier of them now having enough soldiers to fight the Haitian army. They wasn't even fighting the French or any colonial power. They were fighting the Haitian army at this time. But the Haitian army was deep. And when we talk about the Haitian army, they also had Afro-Dominicans ready to fight, right? But the British was able to convince some Afro-Dominicans or some Haitians to fight on their half in exchange for freedom. So it's kind of ironic because the Haitians are fighting for total freedom. So there was a lot of alliances being formed at this time. What else did you guys get at this time? I know, I feel like I'm just hablando aquí, yapping. No? Puedo seguir. All right. Of course, this is a battleground. Like I mentioned in the top, this is a battleground in all different parts of the country. A reason why I think that this is influential time period is because the younger Dominicans that later on become Trinitarios in the country, they see this political grab, what's going on in the country, that later on, remember, the criollos already had their own dialect. Even though they look like Spaniards, because they were mixing, some of them were mixing, they knew their culture. And you also had many of them that mixed with Africans and former Tainos that that are already extinct at this time, but they had their own culture, and they wanted to make sure that later on they can expand their culture. But right now, France was still coming back in. Eventually, the Spanish take over at the end of the book and create the time period of Spanish War. Which the book doesn't really go into that part. Remember, it's a short time period, but the Spanish Boba was a very critical time, a very hard time as well for yeah, that happens in that happened in like 1822. So the end of the era, all right, because I know we almost come into that hour and change, but the end of the era, I put it as the caption, I'm rooting for everybody Black. You know, that's the way I see it. I knew if I try to envision myself when I talk about history in different history courses. If I was cutting sugar canes and I see a dude dressed up in a general suit on a horse, I'm like, yo, what you doing on a horse, bro? You can't do that. What will Master say? You will automatically be drawn to that individual that is fighting against, slavery. So automatically, many of the Africans from all the way to La Romana, all the way from Nigua, that Nigua was already a big rebellion town in the Dominican Republic, San Juan, and Moca, they were all joining in with the army to fight off the colonizers. Right? So in October 1808, the rich landowner Juan Sanchez Ramirez, which was a governor in Santo Domingo, who fled Santo Domingo during the French rule to Puerto Rico. Right? Many of the criollos that had influence, they fled and they always come back. Right? Landed along the northeast coast and began the rebellion in the name of King Ferdinand VII against the French colonizers, administrators of the city of Santo Domingo. Right? Insurgents received aid from Spanish Puerto Rico and British Jamaica. The British at this time also blockaded the capital and occupied the port of Samaná. Right? Samaná is all the way on the northeast. Sanchez defeated those loyal to France at Palo Hincado in November 7th. And in July 9th, 1809, the British captured the city of Santo Domingo. Right? And as a consequence, returned the eastern part of Hispaniola to Spanish rule. Right? Which, even though the book stops, it doesn't go into the Spanish Bobas time period. That's when it comes to the Spanish Boba. All right, and many of the Dominicans start seeing the differences when the Spanish come in influx on the eastern side, where they would speak differently. They come with their old customs. Old customs mean, even though they got rid of slavery, they want to put slavery back. There's a reason why they want to come back. They're not going to come there and be like, oh, me gusta la playa. I love the coconuts here. It's way better than Spain. No, they came there for a reason. Right? Ironically, the Dominicans had gone to war against the French to restore Spanish rule at this time to Santo Domingo, just as the rest of the Hispanic America was preparing to renounce Spanish colonialism. Moreover, the so-called War of Reconquest, following the two invasions by the Haitians that had left the colony completely devastated. This is like later on, and then we talk about this is what led up to that. So I'm rooting for everybody Black. Of course, we want to get rid of slavery. That was the main topic of the Haitian Revolution, rebellion at this time, right? And even we think about even Toussaint. Toussaint was in favor to work with colonizers at this time, as long as they didn't impose slavery, right? Of course, he didn't make it all the way to this time because he died early on. And Dessalines input the independence in 1804. But it's a struggle for slavery, to get rid of slavery. Does anybody have?
I have a question for you. What do you think of the perspective of the writer on Toussaint in particular? Because he gets called out for being a slave owner early on in the book. And when he came into the Spanish side of the island, his method for planting and growing the crops were too close to what slavery felt like for the folks working in the Spanish side. So I was wondering, I'm like, oh, you know, what is his agenda with Toussaint? What is he trying to let us know about it?
So that's an interesting question that goes into, I feel like this time period goes to 1822, right? Remember, Haiti, slavery in Haiti was harsh. So when we think about workhorses, like not workhorses, the people that had to work hard on the land and production, this is what he's used to seeing. Of course, I always, Haiti at this time is very interesting to me, especially that history, because I don't want to say this controversially, because Dominican Republic gets called out for a lot of like racism, and they don't understand that there's been colorism and Black slave owners, even on the probably considered the most progressive Black independent republic of all time. That was happening just on the other side. So him being a slave owner, yeah, definitely is a thing to highlight, and I like that he highlighted that because people don't know. A lot of people don't know that. But also looking at him being a slave owner and giving up that right, because he was one of the people that gave up that right and convinced other Black elites. There was a lot of Black elites in Haiti to give that up, just to give that up to look at the people as a one, not just because they're half or because they were free. They have to look at as a people how they can come together. I think that was the best thing that ever happened to Haiti, because if we know history, even Dessalines, when he became the first emperor and leader of Haiti, he was assassinated, 2 years later in Haiti, and people don't understand. And that's why there is a model in Haiti that's called La Unión hace la fuerza. I don't know how to say it in French or in Creole, but I say it in Spanish, which our force, when we come together, we're a bigger force. And that was something that at that time, Toussaint, Dessalines, Beaujeu, he was part of the Haitian Revolution and later became the president during 1822 to 1843. So him giving up being a slave owner to make sure that the people are free, I think is monumental. He didn't put that in the book, but I like that he mentioned that. Being a slave owner and being too close to slavery, that's what happened in 1822 and 1844. So when the Dominicans were together, they were like, yo, they're enslaving us. Oh, I could just imagine. I try to picture myself at that time period. Like, oh, pero tú estás loco, oh, me va a dar. Yo no quiero trabajar hoy. I don't want to work today. It's and I'll say that it's because of the hardship they endured in the other side. Slavery it was a lot more relaxed in many parts, not all parts, many parts of the eastern side. So I like that you mentioned that. It's because that western side seen a different type of life, a different type of harsh time period. I was able to answer that
Thank
correctly.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Santana. Anybody else have anything they want to add? You know, I would love to hear. You know, I like to hear stuff. You know. Yeah, he was. Yeah, that's true. And the Haitian occupation was. We're not going to go into that today, but it's interesting. It's interesting, but it was hard, and this is the reason why, you know, the Dominican Republic were formed. So discussion for the rest of the book. Even though I was able to read into page 140, which is almost the book, about 70%. What was your perception of the book? Do you think, did you like it? Did you think it was heavy? Do you think it will be a guide later on? Háblame. Talk to me. No? Stephanie.
Well, I just kind of like think overall it's interesting. I didn't get a chance to read, but I was just kind of like drawn by the topic itself, like it being a struggle. One thing that has always fascinated me about the story about the Dominican Republic or the history of like our peoples is just the blendedness, that it's not a clear, concrete story. We would want it to be ideally of this is us and this is them, of this is how, that's how they did it versus this is how we do it. But it's just seeing kind of like when you humanize it and you see it as individual peoples and not just kind of like the big names, but the process of making a decision or what the day-to-day, what was the harsh treatment in that period where there was a gray area, where it's not necessarily, not a lot has been studied or recorded to kind of like break it down. And even thinking about, yes, what is the impact of a treaty? Because yes, it could be a law that has been put into place, but what does that really look like? Because we could put it in the big they, but those theys are individual peoples that not everyone might share the exact same sentiment, but then to be able to come together for a struggle, to be able to sacrifice along the way. It's not like, oh, if you say yes, okay, yes, pro-freedom, yes, pro-independence, a big yes is followed by many little yeses and a lot of no's as well. So it's interesting.
I like that. I like that you mentioned that. Also, just to put a little thing into it, when they ended slavery, so even in like the United States, right? They passed laws to end slavery, and many parts in the South they didn't even know they were free. So it's like a treaty. You don't know. It's not even gonna get a text message. You're gonna get a phone call. Like, hey, what's going on? Hey, man, we're free now. It's not like that. So you know, it took some time. It took some time to really, you know, to really obey by that treaty. But I think that, my personal opinion, I think that if the Haitian Revolution didn't happen at that time, France would have definitely taken over. It would have been a whole different story. The Dominican history is so interesting because they had so many instances like that. Even in 1870, once they even got their independence after the Restoration War, there was a plot from the United States at one time. They almost made them a state. They only missed it by one vote in the Senate, and people don't know that. Which President Grant talks about in one of his memoirs. He's like, his biggest regret is he was the only person that didn't vote on it. The DR would have been like Hawaii. You know, it would have been a whole different culture, a whole different thing. So, you know, it's always good to explore the history of the island, even little snippets like this time period. But you know, it's always interesting to learn more and the people that fought for it. Remember, the DR was the first place in this side of the world that yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. That had, they were the blueprint in the beginning of slavery. You know, they were the blue. They went through things the hard way. Even 100 years of misery that the Dominican criollos had to learn how to trade by themselves and create their own identity played a big part. So, keep studying up, keep your eyes on the Dominican writers, and what Angie's doing with all the great books that she's putting out there. I know my book's a little bit Afrocentric, but I'm gonna try to pick more books that are written by Dominican authors as well, because that's the goal from the organization. We want to make sure that Dominican authors also get highlighted as well. So, if anything else, I think we could stop it right here. If you guys don't have any other questions, I'll still be on. Pero si se quieren ir a comer, I'm with that as well. All right, y'all. No questions?